Hey everybody, Jazzy here. Today I wanted to throw some love at a weapon in Don't Starve Together that doesn't always get the most attention, the Morning Star. I'm gonna give you what I consider to be the best uses of this niche item, and hopefully convince you why it's worth keeping one of these around. Before I start, I want to give a huge shout out to Splorange for fact-checking and helping me to gather all this info. Go check out their channel for a great collection of DST guides that take advantage of some lesser-known mechanics in the game. As far as weapons go, the Morning Star is definitely on the expensive side. It requires 2 doodads, 2 niter, and a Volt Goat horn. The horn is especially annoying to get because it's a 25% drop from Volt Goats, which spawn in herds around the oasis, and they're not super abundant. The weapon's base damage is 29, but it deals electrical damage, which brings the actual damage up to 43. When hitting a wet target, however, the damage per swing increases to 72, making the Morning Star the most powerful melee weapon in the game against wet mobs if you're not eating Volt Goat jelly. While equipped, the Morning Star will emit a small light radius, which is enough to keep the player safe while fighting in the darkness. The weapon has unlimited uses, just slowly loses durability while it's equipped, breaking after 6 minutes of use. If you're only holding it while fighting, it's gonna last you a very long time. Enough to take down most wet mobs in the game, including bosses, with just a single weapon. Think about it. Let's say you're hitting about twice per second. That works out to about 720 uses versus a wet mob that's 52,000 damage with a single weapon. Now, there are only a few ways to induce wetness onto most mobs in the game. Natural rain will raise their wetness much like it does to players, so if you see blue-colored text when you mouse over a mob, they're wet. In winter, rain occurs frequently in the caves, and usually after the first rain of the season, any mobs touching the ground are effectively permanently wet. Build your fossil skeleton and watch it immediately turn wet, almost like it's absorbing the water up from the ground. Water balloons will not make mobs wet, and it's too bad because it would be an excellent way of making bosses wet on demand. The exception to this rule is Dragonfly. Now, Dragonfly has an interesting relationship with water because her enraged state is dependent on her wetness. If it gets above 90 while enraged, then she will revert to her regular state, which you can accomplish with 5 water balloons. However, her vulnerability to electric damage while wet actually scales down as her wetness decreases, so you might get that max damage while she's 100% wet, but after about 10 seconds, you might as well be using a handbat instead. And before we move on to specific Morning Star uses, we should tackle the big koalafant in the room, Volt Goat Chauffoir. A dish that gives any player electric damage for 5 minutes. This multiplies a weapon's damage output by 1.5, and versus a wet mob multiplies it by 2.5. Adding this to pretty much any weapon, even a spear, is going to give you a better damage output than the Morning Star. So why throw your Volt Goat horn into a weapon with less damage? It's a good question, right? There are a couple of reasons I can think of. Firstly, have you made the Celestial Portal yet? Do you have the purple gems and the moon rock needed to switch to Warley and make the jelly? If so, then awesome. Just consider you still need to bundle up the jelly after you make it and switch back to your main character, so I wouldn't recommend this before killing Bee Queen. The Morning Star, on the other hand, never spoils, and any character can craft it. The light radius is a small perk, but very helpful when fighting in the darkness, something else that the goat jelly does not offer. But to me, the biggest advantage to using a Morning Star over goat jelly is that you don't need to use it all at the same time. If you're just trying to maximize your damage for a boss fight, then slam some jelly for sure. But with that one Volt Goat horn, you could also craft a weapon that will last you through numerous regular battles. In everyday situations where it wouldn't be worth using up an entire horn. Are you gonna eat jelly every time you want to fight a tentacle, a depths worm, a wet nightmare creature? No, it would be a waste. By contrast, you will use a tiny fraction of your Morning Star's durability while fighting one of these mobs. It is just so much more practical use of a rare resource. Not faster, but much more economical. And on that note, let's jump into my favorite uses of a Morning Star. Use number 1, depths worms. You know how to tell when a mysterious plant is a glowberry or a depths worm? Unless it rained recently, you can tell by hovering over the plant. If the text is blue, then it's a depths worm because depths worms are always wet. This is why I rarely go to the caves without a Morning Star, because it is the perfect weapon to use against worms. You don't even need a stationary light source. If you're good with item swapping, then you can attack with the Morning Star and then switch to a lantern in between openings to conserve your star durability. Both items emit light, so you're never in the dark. Use number 2, tentacles. Like depth worms, every variety of tentacle is permanently wet. If you were working on clearing a swamp or a reed trap, the Morningstar is a great option. And once I find the tentapillar in the caves that connects to the atrium, I always keep a Morningstar next to it. My favorite combo for defeating tentapillars is a Morningstar plus bramble husk. The area of effect damage will immediately chop any baby tentacles that attack, and the Morningstar will take down the big dog in 11 swings. You could also swap in Fugu Hutch if you don't have Wormwood armor. Use number 3, Toadstool. The most annoying thing about this fight to me is not the length or the challenge, but the resource sink. Weather panes, healing, sanity, light? But there is something exquisitely painful about having to craft 8 dark swords to kill 1 mob. That's a full stack of nightmare fuel and 8 living logs. Compare instead to the cost of 2 Morningstars, which will be more than enough for this fight if Toad happens to be wet. Exponentially cheaper in my opinion. Just wait until winter or spring and go to town. But because of the length of this fight, just make sure to hover your mouse over occasionally to check that it's still wet. If it dries out, you'll want to switch to a higher damage weapon such as a dark sword. Use number 4, Moose Goose. It's easy to forget that Moose Goose has 6,000 health. That's 50% more than Deerclops. So it really helps to maximize your damage during this fight, and fortunately, you will always do this fight in spring when it rains constantly. Take advantage of that and smack her down with a Morningstar. Congratulations! You've used a fraction of your weapon instead of blowing through an entire dark sword. Wet mosslings will fall after 8 swings, which you can usually sneak in while they're dizzy if you're quick enough. Honestly, even aside from the giant ugly birds, there are tons of mobs that will be wet during spring, and carrying around a Morningstar during this time is never a bad idea. Just check to make sure the mob is wet before swinging. Even nightmare creatures that spawn during the rain are usually susceptible to electricity. The final best use of a Morningstar is actually not related to damage output at all. Hitting a Volt Goat with a Morningstar will charge it, and charged Volt Goats drop electric milk when killed. So if you are a fan of ice cream, then you will definitely want to keep a Morningstar near your goat pen. 2 precautions you should take here. First, make sure you're dried off. Charged goats deal electric damage, which can hit very hard against wet players. Second, wear insulating clothing such as a rain cap, raincoat, or umbrella. I learned a cool trick from Helical Puma while touring his base. If you set up a Houndius Shootius outside of a Volt Goat pen, any Volt Goats will aggro on the Houndius. This means that they won't break your walls and they won't be able to reach the Houndius if it's at least a tile away from the pen. If you want to kill the goat, then just hit it once and the Houndius will start shooting it. So if you're worried about Volt Goats getting charged and breaking free, a single Houndius placed outside will make for a very secure pen. But that's it for my favorite Morningstar uses. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Morningstar. Has Volt Goat Jelly effectively canceled this item's usefulness, or is there still a place in the weapons arsenal for the Morningstar? Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks again to Splorange, and see you all next time.